Chapter 58.
You are now listening to the Chapter of the Architect with DJ Architect.
What's going on, my people? Once again, this is your homeboy DJ Architect and the place to be. Want to welcome you guys to another chapter of the Architect. Listen, once again, I got my guest co-host DJ Don Q with me, and listen, ladies and gentlemen, what a special treat we have for you today. DJ, master editor, master producer, record label manager, my people, it is our great pleasure to introduce the talented, the legend, Carlos After Dark Berrios. Mr. Berrios, thank you so much for your time, sir.
That was a great intro. Thank you, man. Thank you for having me.
We're starstruck right now and extremely humbled. When we were growing up and spinning records, your name were on all these vinyls. And now to be able to speak to you, we're humbled. So thank you so much for your time, sir.
You're very welcome. Very welcome.
Jumping right into it, Carlos, tell us about the music scene when you first started DJing.
Wow. Okay, so I got to go way back. It was around 1979, and it might have even been a year earlier that I started to see DJs at house parties, and just seeing the two turntables and a mixer fascinated me. It was probably mostly that little light, that shines on the platter in the dark, and just seeing that sort of thing just piqued my interest, and of course, the music. So to be honest with you, I think the very, very first time that I saw somebody spinning back records, I went to a boys club jam, and I was probably like 13, 14, and I saw this flyer. Somebody handed me a flyer and it said, party, whatever. So I went, and I saw, this guy spinning back a record called Super Sperm by Captain Sky. And I was just standing there, and I was like, wow, man, this is really, really interesting. But what I found even more weird and fascinating was that he was putting on records that I liked that I had never heard before. And but they were covered. Like, he had magic markered all the the names and the artists, so you couldn't see what record it was.
Yeah, the label was covered. Yeah.
Yeah, the label was covered.
How come you can just Shazam it, Carlos?
Not in those days. Yeah, not in those days. I would have had to put a little, one of them little notes on the leg of a pigeon, see if I could get some information. But it was fascinating. I was very young, and I liked anything that was electronic, like most boys, and fascinated by airplanes and going spacecraft and that sort of thing. Even as a kid, I used to walk around. My babysitters now, they tell the babysitters that I had all grown up now, they remind me that I used to walk around with a little chemistry set. I would set it up wherever I could and try to swab people's mouths and shit, so I could see under the microscope and all that kind of thing. So I think my mind always worked, that sort of way. And I met a DJ that I used to follow, and he was a few years older than me. So, and in those days, those few years mattered. So I was just this little kid that would come to the house parties and just watch the DJ all the time. And I would always ask him, please, can you teach me how to DJ? And he would be, he would do the whole, WC Fields, get away from me, kid, you bother me,
Yeah.
yeah, just get out of here, But one day he took me up to his, wherever he had the equipment, and he taught me, the basics of blending. Because, in those days it was all about blending, like how good can you blend? How precise can you be with your blending? And so that was the competition in the neighborhood. And so I just eventually I got turntables and a Clubman 1-1 mixer, and
legend.
And I was off and running, at a very young age, doing house parties.
That's
so let me ask you a question, Carlos. Going through the young times of yourself, as Carlos, as Architect, and I we started out the same way, sort of just mirroring DJs and being fascinated by what they were doing, and controlling a crowd and playing these exclusive tracks. And so at that young age, when did you actually start to create this name for yourself of After Dark? I know I looked and I'm like, is it because he was producing at night, or I think you had a DJ crew at the time, or you started at a young? So tell us about the young age of getting that name.
Well, the whole idea of having a name was part of what I saw. So you saw where I grew up, which was Flushing, Queens. We had several. We had like 3 main projects. One was called the Bland, one was called the Regency, and one was called Latimer Gardens. And so wherever they had the jams, you would go and watch and do all that stuff. And everybody had, like a name, a really cool name, So one of the guys that we used to follow, who was a blender, and he was a Puerto Rican kid out of the Bland. His name was Pez, DJ Pez. And he had this big coffin that he would bring, that his turntables were in, his mixer and his EQ. And he had the big speakers and the whole thing. But, painted in front of his big coffin, it said Part 2. So that was his thing, So wherever he threw his jams, it was Part 2's, going to be DJing here. And then the guy that I used to bother, he had he kind of emulated Pez. So they built a similar coffin, and they used to go around and do jams as Maximum Force,
Mm-hmm.
So eventually when I started DJing, I said, well, Pez was a legend at the time. So he had Part 2. So I created Jam 2, JAM2. And that was my DJ name at the time, with my very first partner. But then eventually I joined up, with that DJ for Maximum Force. And it was with him that we started After Dark, and then that slowly, because there was also that age where I was growing up, and then doing more house parties. You get more people that you want to be around, and plus the neighborhood and the girls, and before you knew it, we had a crew of like somewhere between, and it went up and down. At any given time, you had a crew between 20 and 40 people.
Wow.
They used to come to the house parties, and even in those days, or even before that, even when I was when I was still young, and I used to do house parties, the older kids, from the older crews, they used to protect me, because every once in a while, people come up and try to steal something and that sort of thing. So I remember a lot of fights. I remember a lot of that kind of stuff, just brawls, and it was always a part of it. But except for the disco house parties, those were not like that, and you got to, remember when I first started DJing, which was in, 79, more or less, my first whatever my first Cradle records were, they were all disco, so we're talking about, Edwin Starr, Contact, Voyage, Souvenirs, and I'm a Man, Macho, and, all that stuff. Whatever was disco, that's what I was playing. And then, I just loved music, so I would just play whatever I liked, So as the years went on, it turned into, playing more like the Whispers and Shalimar and, that kind of stuff. And
R&B.
R&B, like all the R&B bands, yeah.
I want to know about your experiences DJing at the legendary Lemoore East back in the days. Could you tell us about those experiences?
Lemoore East was almost an accident, and it's and it happened because I was talking about my crew, right? So my crew's, they're one of the main guys in my crew, his name was Dennis, and his brothers, he had younger brothers, Peter, David, and so these kids used to work out of the concession stand over at the concession stand at Whitestone Lanes, the bowling alley over there by the Van Wyck, and in Flushing, not too far from Latimer Gardens, and they all their friends and everybody used to come and hang out, like in the parking lot. It was just a big hangout place, I didn't really hang out there too much, but I remember one time we did go, and it was like, I don't know, it was like 50 people. It was crazy. It was like just everyone just hanging out. And then I met the owner of the concession stand. He was introduced to me by the kids, and they said, listen, this guy wants to do his birthday party. He wasn't, that much older than us. And his parents, I think, are the ones that own the concession stand, but he used to run it. So his name was James Strapone. And James, kept talking about wanting to do this big birthday bash. And so the kid said, well, listen, if you're going to do a birthday bash, you got to bring in Carlos, and after dark to do the music. So he was like, all right, cool. So we had a meeting. And he was telling me, yeah, I want to do this really big bash, man. I've never done anything like this before. And I said, well, where? And he said, well, I'm talking to this place, Lemoore East, but it seems it might be too big. And I said, well, I've never been there. I know it's a rock place. Let's go check it out. So we took a ride and we went to Lemoore East, and it was a dump. I mean, it was, it was really bad. There was like, I remember that there was a big black curtain from the ceiling to the floor that was draped, like in the middle. So the behind the curtain was the second half of Lemoore East, and it was just like a dump, man. I mean, there was just like all kinds of just stuff, garbage. There was rats, there was roaches. It was disgusting. It was really bad, and the front is what I guess, they were trying to use for their performances, the rock performances. And there was a little stage there and everything. So we actually went behind the curtain, and it was over in the corner. You had to go up these metal stairs. And upstairs was like the sound booth. And that was like, I've never seen anything like that. It was really abandoned. It was really horrible. There were records there, but they were old. They were, water damaged. And,
yep.
Yeah. So, then there was a lot of, I'm talking about like rats and, it was really, really bad. So I looked at James and I said, listen, this place is disgusting. You know what I'm saying? And he's like, listen, I have all the kids from the bowling alley, I'll pay them. They'll help me come and clean this stuff up. This is not a big deal. And I said, well, it's a lot of cleaning. But that's exactly what he did. So they took down the curtain. He had those kids completely clean out all the garbage, and they just cleaned it up. And then they had the issue where there was no sound system, at least not a real sound system. So, there's a lot of details, but it basically started like that. The idea of Lemoore East started as an accident. And the fact that they came to me, was simply because, these kids and everybody was from Flushing. And, so when he did, when I saw that he was serious about, doing this, when they took that curtain down, you realize how big the place was. I mean, it was huge. So I told him, and at the time I had just joined the record pool because I was starting to edit, and I partnered up with Omar Santana in 1986, and he introduced me to Al Pizarro, and so I joined the VIP record pool in the Bronx. So I called Al and I said, listen, Al, I got the situation. I think he wants this to be a big bash, but I think he's going to need some some artists, some performers.
Right.
I don't know anything about that. What do you think? And he said, well, I'm going to hook you up with a guy named Vinny Grillo. He's part of VIP, and he's also from Queens. So Al made the introduction to Vinny Grillo. Vinny Grillo came to, and we had the meeting with James. And he had been doing some promotions, so he had some experience booking acts into nightclubs and things like that. So he came in, and he became a partner. with James. Now this is where it gets really, when I look back, because I was always interested in music. I was never really interested in anything else. And James, he said, all right, so we're going to be partners. And I said, dude, I don't want to be partners in anything. I just want to DJ. So, you know what I'm saying? I don't know anything about promoting. I don't know anything about nothing, which is probably a bad move, but that's all I was interested in. I didn't know anything about anything. I didn't want to jump into anything I didn't know anything about. So,
how old were you, Carlos, at this time?
22.
Okay.
Maybe somewhere.
So 22, you didn't really have the business mind yet to be like, you know what? I could get a piece of this door. I could get a piece of this bar.
No, my mind thought I wasn't thinking anything along those lines.
And we can't blame you, Carlos. We felt the same way too. It's not till we become grown men that we have to pay bills that we're like, you know what? We have to start making money out of these ventures and whatever love we have for the art. We have to make money.
This goes way back. This goes way back to promoters taking it. I hate to say it, but taking advantage of a DJ's love and passion. That they're like, Carlos is a beast, man. He don't even want a part of the door, and he's the best DJ around here. He's bringing in 100 people. He don't even realize.
Right.
So that's a part of our fault as DJs, that we just care about the music so much. We like the adrenaline of the crowd that we didn't capitalize on the business portion of it.
Well, in my mind, you have to remember also that I'm looking at this situation as, a dump, with no sound system, a place that's so big that I have no idea, I'm expecting 50 people to show up, that kind of thing.
Oh yeah. It held up to 3,000 people, right? Those are huge.
The place was huge. So who knew what it was going to be, really? Like, who knew that it was going to become what no one had a clue. This was just supposed to be a birthday party, right? So, but James had, he had money. So I remember that they rented a system, and and it was a temporary situation. It was just for one night. But Vinny did a great job, promoting the night, and the first night was a success. I believe it was August 20th, 1987. L'Amour East opened its doors, and it was crazy. The place was packed. There was like another 1,000 people outside. So that first night, it was it took everybody by surprise. And of course, as you can imagine, they made a killing at the door.
Sure. Can imagine. So 3,000 people. What?
Yeah.
Did they take care of you, Carlos, as far as money wise for that evening?
I honestly don't remember. I don't remember. I was charging a lot of money for DJing. You know.
Mm-hmm.
But
so you were happy with that. You were happy with your money that you got as a DJ, and you just, it was good to be packed out.
I was fine, Yeah. I was good, and all I had to do was show. I mean, listen, this was the first night. You know what I mean? And then James, that's more or less when James he came back and he said, "Listen, I want you to come in and be a partner." And I said, "Listen, I don't want to. I'm doing something. I was trying to get into the music business. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have anything yet, as I hadn't produced anything yet. I was still an editor. Me and Omar, I think, had broken up at that point, and I was on my own. So I had only done a couple of records on my own as an editor, but I was looking to make records, and I wasn't really sure how I was going to do that. So that was my focus, And then after that first night, the L'Amour East thing became political because Vinny Grillo's boy was Juan Cato, and Juan Cato's also from Queens, and but from a different part, so they weren't from Flushing. I think they were from Ozone Park or something like that. And but this was a Flushing thing, so it got a little tense there for a minute. Not with Juan Cato, because he was always cool, even if behind the scenes, they were trying to figure out how to get me out of the way, but it wasn't really happening because the Flushing crew always took care of me. And but then after, I'm going to say, because L'Amour East didn't last that long. It was a very short run. So I think after about 6 months, I left, and I was offered the spot at I was offered the spot at Heartthrobs after Little Louie went to Studio 54. So I went there for like a month, but it didn't work. Louis took his entire crowd, so it wasn't going to work.
Wow.
And the people from Queens weren't going to leave Queens to go to Heartthrobs, especially not without Little Louis.
Right, Carlos. So, because I love your editing work and production, but because we don't want to keep you on here all day. I'd love to, but I'm sure you have a life.
Speak for yourself, Carlos. Keep on here all day.
But listen, how did you start the transition? And I don't want to say transition because you were probably still DJing. I don't know. I'm just assuming. But how did editing come into your life as far as, and could you explain to the listeners what editing is? A lot of people that listen to the podcast, they're not really familiar with music terms. So I guess number one is, what got you into editing music, and then could you explain what editing is?
Editing is a manipulation. Well, actually, look, editing started because when they would record, let's say like a band, and in the old days they only had like 2 tracks, 4 tracks to record the entire band. They would, punching in didn't exist. That sort of thing didn't exist. So you would sort of do a main take, and then if you needed to, grab, let's say, like the chorus from a different take and edit it, cut it into, that main take. That's the way. They would sort of compile, I guess, a version from the best takes. That's basically what it was. Right. And, but then you had people like, Larry Levon and Tom Moulton and these guys who started doing remixes, and they figured out, that they could extend, like breaks and things like that. They could create these long intros, which they did on these disco records, right? Mm-hmm. And so then there was that type of editing, where you were sort of expanding what was already there. So if the original song was 4 minutes long, they could make it 8 minutes long by doing this.
Just by looping 2 or 4 bars.
Yeah, and I have to say, but it has to be in the mix.
Right. It together, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Because they're like, oh, we want 16 bars of drums with just the percussion. So then they would have to go in the mix, and they would have to turn off or mute
all the other
the vocals,
instrumentals. Yep.
Right. The bass lines, the other keyboards, and just leave the drums, record that, and then edit that into the sequence, which you would do on a tape machine. So there was that type of editing. And then the Latin Rascals happened, and the Latin Rascals, I don't know their story firsthand. I only know the story as it's been told to me. And from what I understand, they both worked at, or at least Tony Moran worked at a record shop, popular record store. And Paco, from a famous DJ from New York, from KTU here, would go to that store. And Tony Moran would play him some, these mixes that him and Albert were working on.
Albert Cabrera, yep.
Albert Cabrera, Tony Moran and Albert Cabrera. And it was a combination of because I know DJs, along with DJing, a lot of them figured out how to do this, where you would go to the tape machine and record your mix, and then you could pause it somewhere if you made a mistake, and then, sort of pick it up if you knew how to do it right, if you knew how to let go of the pause button.
Your timing was good.
At the right time. Yeah, if your timing was really good. So Albert took that idea and he just mastered repeating phrases using a pause button, and, so instead of, so it would just be like, repeat, it would be like, I don't know, I'm not going to do it, but it would repeat a phrase over and over again. And then they started to combine that also with a reel-to-reel, and they would go back and forth between the tape machine, a reel-to-reel, and some effects, and they would make these really interesting mixes, that nobody had ever thought of, doing quite that way before, using just these tools that, just any kid can have. And when Paco heard this, he took those tapes and he started playing them on KTU.
Marvelous,
and that was it.
Marvelous. Fucking ingenious, man.
Yeah. And, and so kids like me, who would be listening to the radio, while hanging out in the park in the city or whatever, you would hear these mixes and you're like, man, I'm a DJ and I know this music and it does not sound
like
what
that.
Are they,
like, what are they doing? Yes.
Right. What are they doing? Exactly. So then it became, they became a legend to DJs because everybody was trying to figure out how are they doing this stuff? So, around this time I ended up having to leave New York. I was maybe 15 and I had to go back. I had to go to Colombia for 2 years. The idea was for me to finish high school there because my dad had gotten an opportunity, and it was a coal mine project that Exxon was working on in the desert, La Guajira, over on the coast in Barranquilla. So my father said, "Listen, this is an opportunity for you to go to a good school. Even if it's only for the last 2 years of high school." And get out of New York because I was getting into trouble, so my parents were concerned. And so I went kicking and screaming. And the first year that I was there, I made no friends. I was very antisocial. I was, heartbroken, all that stuff. But I was bored out of my mind, terribly bored out of my mind. So I came back to New York for summer vacation, and I was committed to bringing back at least 2 crates of records. And even if I had to buy some cheap turntables so that I wouldn't, take the chance of losing mine, that's what I did. So
you would spend your time doing what you're doing, mixing in a bored environment, I would say.
Yeah. So I took, I don't remember, I think they were D1s, they were still direct drive, but they weren't like my real turntables. But I took those, I took a pair of those, a new Clubman mixer, and 2 crates of records. We had them shipped to Colombia, and I set it up there in the living room of where we lived, and I would just DJ to myself. But then I don't know what came, like some idea jumped into my head, and I had never I was too young to go to nightclubs, so. But I started asking, what's the hottest nightclub here? And remember, this was all before L'Amour East. So I'm like, where's the hottest nightclub? And it said this place, Disco 96, which was on 96th Street, right on the edge of the city, was the nightclub at the time. And so I went, one night and I checked it out, and I realized that they don't DJ. All they do is they play a record, they let it end, everybody applauds and they leave the dance floor. And so the next, and I was like, "Ooh, okay."
Ouch.
Yeah. So I went back another time, and because I was trying to build up my courage, and I spoke to somebody there, and I said, "Listen, I'm from New York. I'm a DJ. This is what I do," and I'm explaining to them, I'm trying to explain to them because my Spanish was horrible, and about what blending was, and 2 turntables and a mixer and the whole thing. And the guy was fascinated, So this guy who I'd never met before drove me to the apartment. We picked up my turntables, my mixer, and my records. We went back to the club just as it was opening, and he plugged me in because he was actually the DJ. He was the one that was, that would play the music. And I played for like 3-4 hours, and I had the place drenched. It was like, like when the walls are drenched in sweat, and you get
I love that.
The place was just going bananas. So the owner came, and he said, "Listen, he goes, well, first of all, he's like, who the hell are you?" And so the guy explained to him, and he said, this dude's from New York, blah blah blah, and, whatever. And he said, "Listen, if you're gonna work, if you work with TJ, because the guy's name was Tony Jimenez, the other DJ." And he said, "If you're going to hang out with Tony, anything that you want, you come in for free, you want a table, anything you want, you're good." I'm like, "Okay, cool, thanks." And it turned out that Tony, TJ, he was also the music director for the biggest radio station in the city, Universal Stereo.
Man, there's a hookup for radio right there.
That's the connect, brother.
Mm-hmm.
So, again, another accident, right? It's like he just happens to be the music. Yeah. So eventually, he takes me, I start telling him about the Latin Rascals, and I tell him, this is like talking all this stuff. And he was fascinated. So he ordered an edit block from Miami, and it came, it took like a month for it to arrive, but it came, and then he got permission, and they let me borrow a reel-to-reel from the radio station, and they brought it to my apartment. And that's where I made my first mix on tape.
Who taught you how to edit and splice? Because that art's been lost, Carlos. It's been lost, man. Who taught you how to sit down and, I mean, obviously you heard that the Latin Rascals were doing this, but who actually sat you down and said, okay, look, this is how you cut and with tape and you manipulate this whole art? How did you learn that?
I figured it out myself. And I think it's really funny because, you know, the only people that knew what they were doing were the Rascals. And people like me and Omar and everybody else, you know, we sort of figured out our own way of doing it. But there was a foundation that everybody figured out. And it's the same thing, which was you had to figure out what the measurement was based on the tempo of the song. If you're going to do quick edits, you have to know what that measurement is. And, you know, my way of figuring it out was marking, you know, with the grease pencil, marking the downbeat and then marking the first snare, and then taking that and then dividing it into four, basically, whether it was by, you know, bending, you know, folding the tape 4 times, you know, so that it's exactly even.
All in length. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Because, you know, if you get the measurement wrong, when you do your edits, they might be just a little bit too fast or a little bit too slow, and it doesn't sound right, you know? So one of the complaints that I remember all the DJs used to have about edits was, you know, when the edits come in, it goes off beat. And they said, but except for you, for some reason, your edits don't go off beat. And I don't know that I did anything different, except, you know, I tried to be very meticulous about the measurements, you know, so that it would stay on the exact tempo of the song.
Hey,
but,
Carlos, I'm clueless, but I'm just guessing. I'm taking a shot in the dark. If the tempo of the song was at a higher BPM, I'm assuming that the cut of the length is going to be shorter versus a slower BPM. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly right.
Let me ask you a question, Carlos. When you saw that person bringing in that reel-to-reel to your house, was that like a person bringing you $1 million, like a guy that's in Colombia that's not able to take care of his craft, that lost track of New York? How did you feel when you saw that reel being brought into your apartment?
You know, just excited, you know, just that same type of excitement you feel when you get your first turntable and you're opening the box, you know, that feeling, you know, like, oh man, I can't wait, you know, to get started. You know what I mean?
Let me ask you a question also. When you were playing in Colombia, was it a heavy salsa cumbia scene, or were they trying to be New Yorkish with their music, like disco and you know, house music? What was that like?
I think like it still is here. You know, it's a combination. You know, they'll have their American set, you know, their dance set. They'll have their cumbia set. They'll have the salsa set, you know. And, you know, so it's not like they played, you know, Planet Rock and then, you know, some vallenato, you know, and then another disco record. It was a set, you know. So
it was a set.
Yeah. And it was always the dance music that would tire them out. So after a while, you know, you knew when they had a break. Yeah, you knew when they had enough, and then you had to slow it down a bit. But
were you spinning vinyl, Latin vinyl at that time, or did you invest in salsa and cumbia and stuff, or did you just strictly like in the dance scene?
No, I was strictly what I grew up on, man. You know, I didn't, you know, and the funny thing is this about me, which I'm glad the new generation doesn't have the problem that I did, which was, I think because I had been
Americanized. You're like Americanized, right?
Well,
you felt Americanized.
Well, you know, for all intents and purposes, I was, you know, I grew up with pop culture, you know, so to me, everything was, you know, the Brady Bunch and, you know, all that stuff and McDonald's and, you know, so that's what you grow up on. I didn't. Once I learned, because even though I've been here since I was a baby, you know, from a few months old. The truth is, because my mom didn't speak English, I didn't really learn English until I started to go to school. And once I did learn English, you know, I just it was like a struggle, you know. It was like because they do the whole thing. Like they're like, okay, we got to give you a little bit extra time. So I was one of the kids in the back of the room, spending more time on see Tom run, see Jane, see all that stuff.
At that time, Carlos, did they have to go to? Because I was born in El Salvador, so I came to New York when I was 4. So I had to go. All I knew was Spanish, so I had to go through ESL. English as a
second language.
Second language. So all those, so you're right. All that extra time needed to be devoted to me. But to be honest with you, going to school, that's how I learned my English. But my next door neighbor was African American, Rodney Keynes. So, I would come into the house and my mom would be making tortillas and I'm like, hey, what's up, man? And my mom like, ¿Qué? No me hables así, cabrón, But no, I totally understand, some of the situations that you had to go through.
It was, but here's the thing, you're not conscious of it. You don't think of it, but then next thing you know, all your friends, they all speak English. And it's multicultural, so I had Asian friends, I had, African American friends, I had white friends, I had Latino friends, so it was just easier just to speak English. And then my mom and I got into the terrible habit of she would speak to me in Spanish and I would respond to her in English.
Oh yeah.
So there was no reason for me to continue to speak Spanish. So after 10 years, I lost the language. And which is really bizarre, but that's what happened.
But do you? You could still understand someone if he, speaks to you, right? Is it more on the understanding or speaking?
No. It was just formulating the correct words to express yourself.
Oh, hey, you're fine, brother. Because believe me, when I would have conversations, with my mom, she would say, "You're embarrassing me. Don't say nothing." My Spanish was so tore up. But if someone speaks to you in Spanish, you would still be able to understand.
No,
right?
I understand perfectly. And
go.
Honestly, if you give me a book in Spanish, I could read it to you.
Hey, there you go. So you straight.
You know what I mean?
You straight.
So it was just it was just the expressing yourself.
Right.
So, but after 2 years in Colombia, I got it back. I was speaking Spanish again. Of course, I did an interview. I did an interview at the radio station there in Barranquilla, near Sala Stereo, and the main DJ, his name was Marco Aurelio. That was his name. So he did an interview with me because I started to do mixes for the radio station that they would play on Saturday nights, right? I was trying to do over there what they were doing here, and I was really excited about it. So it was such a new thing. He wanted to interview me, so he did, and he was disappointed that my Spanish was so bad. And he called me gringo chimbiao, which means fake gringo. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, wow.
Because I'm not white, but I'm Latino, but I'm Colombian, even worse, and I can't, and I wasn't able to hold a proper conversation. But that changed.
Yeah.
That changed over time. That changed over time. And now, I speak more Spanish than
Carlos,
than before.
I got to tell you something, though. It's funny because yesterday I went to go do my my smog check on my vehicle, and the owners of the place, I live here in California, close to San Diego, and the owners of the place are Colombian. And every time I go in there, they have the little Colombian flag. And I'm like, every time I go, I want to go eat Colombian food down in San Diego. There's only 2 restaurants around this area, and they're like an hour away from where I'm at. But I love Colombian food. There's a plate that you guys have with aguacate, arroz. Yes,
bandeja paisa,
with the pork belly. Con las arepas and queso. Ooh, man. I love Colombian food.
Colombian food is very tasty, definitely, for sure.
Yeah, I want to say something. We have a DJ in our crew, DJ Raz. He's a Colombian.
Sorry, Raz. I'm sorry, Raz.
He's hating on. He's going to hate on all of us because I know he wanted to talk to you, especially being Colombiano. But I got to say something about Colombians, man, right now, because you know what? I'm Puerto Rican, and I understand that my people speak horrible Spanish. But when I went into this man's house, Raz's house was the mecca of Spanish speaking. Like these Colombianos spoke perfect Spanish, bro. I'm going in there with my slang, and they would just make fun of me, man, to no end.
Hey, listen,
how I spoke.
Colombians have the most sweetest twang to their accents. I don't know what it is.
100%.
Yeah, I love hearing them talk, man. And I used to go out. I used to date a Colombian girl for 2 years, man. So I used to be like, talk to me in Spanish, please, because I loved her twang. And then she would make fun of me because Salvadorians somos tan malcriados, you know. So, but Colombians have the sweetest tang, and their accent is so. To me, it's
Without a
beautiful,
doubt.
man. I love hearing them talk.
Yeah. It's like music. It sounds like beautiful music.
Very proper, man. Very proper.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because, you know, in the capital, in Bogotá, which is where I was born, they speak that way. It's a very proper, you know, very Castilian type of Spanish, and they're very proud of that, you know. But when you start to go to the coast, it changes, you know. So where I was living in Barranquilla, they have a very, very, all the coastal cities have a very specific type of slang that they speak, and their rhythm is different, and it's much more colorful and much more, you know. So it would be the difference between how someone speaks in New York and someone speaks in Louisiana, you know.
Right.
Yeah,
that different, you know. So I grew up with that. So when I was there, I learned, that's what I learned. So I walked away speaking that type of dialect, you know, very, very, very barranquillero type thing, you know.
Yeah, one of my friends was a Barranquillero too, and I remember hanging out with his parents, whatever. And we're hanging out outside, and he goes, "Hay mucho bicho aquí afuera." I'm like, what the hell is this guy talking about, man? This guy is saying there's penises out here, bro. There's no penises out here.
Yeah.
He's saying bichos like crazy. I'm like, yo, tell your pops to relax, man. You can't be talking like that. There's women out here.
Yeah.
I didn't realize there were mosquitoes, man. I had no idea.
That's funny, man. Yeah, everyone has different slang, man.
It's very cool.
Yeah, but let's move forward, man, because the time is of the essence. As a matter of fact, Carlos, I think we're going to have to make arrangements to do a part 2 for this, man, because it's too juicy, and I don't want to fast forward it for the sake of time. I want to let the juice trickle at its own pace, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But listen, let's talk about Bits and Pieces 86, 87, man. Beautiful cuts on those vinyls, man. Talk to us about Bits and Pieces 86, 87.
Before I move on to that, just so that you know, just for your knowledge, after Colombia, I moved to Laredo, Texas for 2 years. So I was away from New York for 4 years, and when I got back, I believe it was 1985, and it was in 1985 into 1986 that I bought a little reel-to-reel, a small one. It was like I think it was an Akai. Yeah, I think it was an Akai, and that's where I started to do my mixes, you know. And growing up, even back in the disco days, you guys got to remember, you know, they used to do those things back then. I remember my first Bits and Pieces record back in 1979 or 1980, you know.
Wow.
And they had different labels for them. They had the Bits and Pieces. They had one called Dudley Medleys. They had one called the Big Apple Super Mix, something like that.
Wow.
And these were all DJ records, you know, that you can buy in certain stores, because obviously they were bootleg. So I had in mind that I wanted to, you know, to convert one of my mixes, because, you know, I didn't originally start that way. I was doing all these mixes and learning how to edit and you know, just trying to up my game a little bit and that sort of thing. But I ended up with these tapes, and I said, well, maybe I could do something with these, you know. And it was my friend Nordi Cado, who I met at the Institute of Audio Research here in New York. He went through the whole program. He actually got his certificate. I quit in the middle. I just, you know, it wasn't what I thought it was going to be. And
was it too structured, Carlos? Was it like too I don't know, structured that you were like, I can't do it. I want to do it because I love it, and I absolutely ascertain knowledge. But what made you leave and not stay for the certificate?
Carlos could have probably taught the class. Come on,
I know, man. But
well,
like, what am I doing here?
Well, they definitely had an edit class, you know. And I honestly don't remember this. Nordy would be able to tell the story better, because I don't remember if it was a discussion that I had with the editing teacher that, you know, that turned me off, or if it was Nordy who told me a story that he got into a fight with the editing teacher because he already knew what I was doing, that sort of thing. I don't remember. But Nordy, and this is really interesting because Nordy Cotto is somebody who went on. He got a certificate, and his first job was at one of the big studios here in New York. But that studio was in Queens. It was called Power Play. So they used to do a lot of hip hop.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Didn't he record Biggie? Wasn't he responsible for Hypnotize Nordy, or was involved in Biggie's records?
I honestly don't know. But I know that at that time, they were doing like Salt and Pepper, and all that kind of stuff was being done out of there, and also Noel, Silent Morning was recorded there.
Nice.
And so Nordy, he brought me in, and we sort of, whatever it is that I was doing, whatever he was doing, we sort of joined forces a couple of times. Nordy Cotto is the person who wrote Jasmine on the Loose, and asked me if I would produce it. So that's how that happened, and he brought me into Power Play to mix it, because I produced it someplace else, and we did the vocals and mixed it over at Power Play.
Wow.
And Jasmine on the Loose was, there were 3 records I did. My first 3 records, year 1, 1987, was Out of Control by Karina, Jasmine on the Loose.
Love it.
And Make Noise.
Love it with Lizette Melendez.
Lizette Melendez on the vocal.
Hey,
yeah.
Listen, okay, so now let me go ahead and do another connection, my brother. Okay, so now we've captured somewhat of the editing story. Now you're producing. What or who gets you into production and gives you that love, that bite for you to want to start production, and how did you learn? Give us that story.
Like everybody else, most of the DJs, again, they were looking for, nobody knew what they were doing. Everybody was looking for a way in, and trying to figure out what people were doing. But we would all talk, and we would be fascinated and trade stories and gossip and that sort of thing. Another good friend of mine from Brooklyn, Louis Martinez, he was a DJ. His nickname was Rockhard, Louis Rockhard Martinez, and he ended up landing a job as an assistant at a facility in New York called Sync Sound, which still exists. And Sync Sound is a place where they mix film. So it's that kind of facility. It's not really a recording studio.
Wow.
Yeah. So they have they had the big stages, to do this work, and it was, top of the line. I think at that time it was the most advanced and the biggest studio in the United States, for film mixing. So he landed a job there, and he's he's a very animated dude. So he would always, and very curious and asked a lot of questions, and, so they really took a liking to him. And there was a dude named Chuck Hammer, a composer who had a room in one place in that facility, and Louis became friendly with him, and expressed to him, that he was interested in making music, and just like all of us, and Chuck said, listen, you work here. I trust you. If you want to come, I don't work on weekends. The place really wasn't open on weekends. It was just a Monday to Friday facility.
Right.
So Chuck gave him the keys and said, here's my room.
Oh,
if you want to, if you want to do anything. So the first thing he does is he calls me, and he says, yo, this is what's going on. So I'm like, yo, I'm there, So me and Louis sat down, and without knowing anything about anything, slowly, because it took a lot of weekends for us to figure out how to use, Performer, one on Mac. What was that Mac? It was I think it was that Mac 2CI, the little screen one, like one of the first Macs.
It was like the little white computer with the screen. Yeah.
Little green screen. Green screen. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was our struggle, man.
Oh my goodness,
and together we sat down and just started to figure out how to do stuff. How to how to sequence, how to play and capture and fix notes and that sort of thing. So truthfully, and so Louis on the Out of Control record as co-producer. But we struggled, we learned together like that. We knew absolutely nothing, like zero, about anything. So when it came time to do vocals, I think it went on for months of weekends.
I was gonna say, I was gonna say that, man, because vocals I'm a producer too, Carlos.
Right.
So believe me, I use a DAW, which is Reason, but working with vocals, that's a totally different monster, man. Oh my goodness.
Well, I think, it was being traumatized early on in doing vocals because I didn't know what I was doing. Because I have a lot of horror stories. I'm someone that I don't mind taking risks, and I don't mind, falling on my face. And that becomes a little harder, with success, because then your ego comes into play. But in those days, I had nothing to lose. So I said yes to everything. And so we would be recording, not really understanding how to get a better, how to direct the artist, how to get that kind of. So from a technical standpoint, Louis was learning a lot because he was the one running the board, and he was the one, running the technical stuff. And I was trying to figure out how to play things that were in my head, that kind of thing.
That's so difficult, man. That is something extremely difficult.
But that's how that happened.
Yeah. But you know what? I got to tell you something. To me, this is my personal humble opinion. I think it's a better way of trial and error because you learn the hard way. And even though you fall on your face, I don't know, 100, 1,000 times, those lessons are very heavily learned. And you learn from that, and then you start to get your own process of doing things and your own shortcuts and your own technique, which make it very different from other people's sound. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. Of course, but and I can't speak for anyone else. I know that my stuff sounds different than anybody else's. I know that, I was very interested in being good at what I did. I had my personality is like that. I want things to be really good as they could possibly be.
Yes.
So early on, when I was learning, there was, I made a lot of mistakes because I didn't know. And you would also find yourself in situations where, you were surrounded by people who were actually schooled in music and that sort of thing. So then I had to learn how to be, well, I didn't have to learn, I was basically, I was self-minded. I'm a Taurus, so I'm really quiet, but I can also be that bull. So when time came and it's like, listen, this is the way I want it. And then somebody would say, some keyboard player or whatever would be like, well, I'm Juilliard trained and, this diminished sevenths doesn't really work with the blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, dude, I don't know what the hell you're talking about. All I know is this is the way I want it.
You're
and
right.
If you don't like it, there's the door.
DJ Doc Q, he's right. He's right, because at the end of the day, it comes down to a personal inner feeling. And if you could read, I can't read notes. All right, great. You can, all that Wyclef shit. Great for you. Thank you. Good for you and your certificate. But I know a certain feeling. And if that moment, that particular note or chord gives me that feeling, I don't want anyone else to mess with it.
Right. No,
that's
of course
not what I want.
It's funny because I'm listening to Carlos talk about his struggles and how he's saying that, he's had trouble with vocals and he had trouble in the beginning. But I want to tell you a few things that a few of the artists have said about you. I'm going to go through a list of all different artists that you have worked with. I put this list together. Structured, perfectionist, tireless worker, the best editor I ever met, extreme attention to detail, extremely unique, the best producer I ever worked for. So while you're going through all these things and you're learning in your learning process, I just want you to know that the artist that you have worked for has said these things about you. How do you feel about that?
It makes me feel good, of course. Look, the struggle was always, you got to understand something, I think one of the problems, and maybe even for me, it took me a minute to figure that out, but as a DJ, I was always interested in the beat, the track, and as a DJ producer, that sort of that becomes the priority over the song, and sometimes over the artist. So a lot of what you hear about people like me that came up is, they didn't focus on the vocal. They didn't try to get a good vocal. They didn't work at it. They didn't do it the way that you do it, And I said, okay, so now I know that I'm different in that sense. But as far as I'm concerned, the artist is pinnacle. The artist is the cherry on the dessert. It's the top of the pyramid. The artist has to shine. So you have to spend whatever time is necessary to make sure that happens, and even more importantly, that they have a song that's appropriate to them. That's a good song that works for them. Not just any song, to any artist. So yeah, and I think it goes back to those days where I was recording Karina for the first time, and we spent countless hours and not really understanding why it wasn't working or what I was doing wrong or what she was doing wrong.
It was like a process of elimination. You're just going through it to see what sounds good eventually, and you're going to find it. You're just trying to find it.
Yeah. So eventually it manifests itself in that way. So people who work with me do more hours of vocals than they do with other people, unless you're working with, like people on the A-list level, they're going to work you. They know how to work you,
Right.
But most of the horror stories that I've heard have been like that. They're like, oh no, it was like a rough demo vocal, and that's what they kept, and that's what they put out, and those kind of stories.
So Carlos, tell me about Out of Control. What was that a label that picked you up? Did you make money on that with Karina, or tell us about that in the early days of Freestyle, that label, that song, because we all know it was a hit, Powerhouse. Tell me about the business end of that.
Again, not really understanding what was going on. Because look, getting back to the story about my friend, Louis Martinez, this was all done without really understanding what the end game would be, And it was because I DJ'd at Lemoore East that night because I had taken the Out of Control demo around. I had already established certain contacts in the music industry because I was being hired to edit,
Right.
And at that time, editing was a big deal in the music industry. So I was one of the guys, one of the main guys that used to get hired to edit other people's stuff. So, I would hit the labels up, and I remember I took Out of Control to my boy Booz Carbone, who was at Atlantic at the time. I took it to Aldo. He turned it down. I took it to, whoever it was that I knew at that time. Nobody really liked it because they said it was a weird track. It was a weird song. And, they just weren't really hearing it beyond the demo that I had created, or that me and Louis had created. So it wasn't until Lemoore East. And I said, I'm going to put Karina on the lineup, even though she doesn't have a record out. Because why not?
Why not? Yeah, exactly. Use your structure. Yeah, use it. Use what you have, man.
Yeah,
definitely. I love that.
So it was Aldo who ran up to the DJ booth when Karina, she finished performing on stage. Because she was sexy. She looked good.
Beautiful.
And, yeah, she had good stage presence and the whole thing. So he ran up and he goes, "Yo, is that the girl? The demo that you were showing me?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "All right, let's talk Monday."
See that? You see that? Now you gave it a face. You gave a beautiful face to the beautiful song.
It's funny because here in a couple of weeks I'm going to see Corina and Tony Moran on Freestyle. They got like a yacht show with Niaja and all these talents. So I'm believe me, man, I'm trying to touch these people and be like, hey, love your music, man. Love your music. I'm sorry, Carlos. Go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. So once that happened, listen, I'm going to tell you something right now. Everything I've ever done has gone through that initial period of, people don't understand it and didn't like it. All right. Together Forever was rejected for a year and a half by practically every record company in New York City.
I was going to ask you that question. The funny thing is, Carlos, I was leading. That was like my number 9 question. But since we were on it, I was like, well, he's going to bring it up. Go ahead, brother. Tell the story. Go ahead.
But hold on, Carlos. You know what? Now that you say that, all the listeners that are listening, everybody out there, DJs, record people that are listening to this podcast right now, Carlos After Dark is living proof of never, ever giving up.
Yep.
This man knew what he had. His sound was distinct and different, and he had his own style. It was different than what was out there. So, of course, he's going to get no's. But this man's tireless work kept it, and that song is probably the soundtrack to all of our lives that listen to this podcast.
I wrote the question down. I thought about it. So before you say something, Carlos, let me ask it. Because I had to take some moments to formulate it. Listen, your production on Together Forever was groundbreaking. Lizette Melendez, dynamic singer, outstanding performer, my personal opinion. Great song. But many people, when you were shopping it around, did not think that. Tell us about the whole process of you shopping that around, and did you know you had a banger in your hand?
You know, you never really know what you have. The truth is, and I've told this, in interviews, and I think people are aware at this point, but the record was originally meant for Frankie Cutlass. And Frankie Cutlass, that's an interesting story, because Frankie is somebody who we met when they were doing, when And More first came out. You'll Never Find Another Love.
Oh, love
came
that
out,
song. Yeah.
Yeah, it came out at the same time as, Make Noise. Mm-hmm. So we were doing, basically the same shows. They would hire us both, to do the same type of shows. So we would hang out a lot, behind the scenes. And Frankie was always, he was always a character. He was very young and he was always funny and fun and all that stuff, but very, 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 passionate, very passionate about the music. So he always had ideas. Even along the years, we probably did like 3 demos that we've lost, just ideas that were done and abandoned and that sort of thing. So, Make Noise was the first freestyle record with a loop, with a hip hop loop. And I wanted to continue that path, and I had done several demos, before Together Forever, with that in mind. There was one that didn't come out for the set. Andy Panda wrote it. Andy Panda from Niobe and the Cover Girls, and so he wrote a song called "Love Is Lies" to a track that I did, that was like that. Very ahead of its time, and I was very, very amped up about it. But for some reason, the song wasn't really working. So even though we recorded it, I put it aside because I didn't know how to fix it. So I left it alone. And then we started doing demos. We had these songs. We had 3 songs that were for a male artist, because my songwriting partner at that time, Frank Reyes, who does all the lyrics and melodies, he was demoing them. So there was one called Leave Me. There was one called Do Unto Me. And there was one called, there's another one. I can't remember the name. And then in the middle of all that, Frankie comes and he says, yo, I want you to produce me. I want you to give me that, I want to do something with you. So we had talked about it a lot. And he had just, done something that was like an urban legend type of, nobody really heard it, but I had a copy of it. He had done a version of Give Your Love to Me, so I don't know the full story about how that happened, but he was working at some studio in the Bronx, that I think Chrissy Ais was a part of. And him and Kay, I think, were working on something. I don't know the full story. All I know is that one day he plays me this cassette, and it's Frankie singing, Give Your Love to Me. And he sounds really good. His voice sounds really good.
Wow.
And at the end, because he's such an enthusiastic guy, and, he, at that time, people, just loved his enthusiasm. He got Mark Anthony. He got, I think, Danny Holiday. He got Chrissy Ais, and I think even George Lamond to do ad-libs at the end.
That's
all the way
right.
at the end. Yes.
Yeah. Let's just home in high. We listened to that demo over and over and over. We know every single section of that. Yo, Marker, give it up.
Yeah.
Yo, Cutlass, give it up. It has all these little pieces on it. Yeah.
Yeah. So forget about it. When he used to put, we used to rock that, just like you guys know, we used to get goosebumps.
Why did they never come out with? See, when they came out with the album, it never was on there with these acts. Chrissy was off of it. Mark was off of it. Why didn't they bring it on the TKA album with the acts on it?
It should have came in as a remix,
Yeah.
on the album.
Well, it was a little bit more difficult than that. It was there was politics, there was money. It was a whole thing that happened
with labels. Yeah.
Well, the song was produced in a studio, and so basically, I think they felt that they owned the master, and it got complicated. From what I understand, I wasn't there, but that's why it didn't happen, and they had to recreate it. They had to recreate it, and that's why it doesn't really sound the same.
Oh man.
But
that was an awesome
shame,
version of that song with so much talent.
But it just goes to show you how politics can extinguish, a piece of good art. Even though I remember DJ Raz, the El Colombiano, he was like, "Yo, don't let nobody hit us, yo. Don't let nobody hit us, yo."
I gave it to him because I got it from George Lamont's brother, who gave it to me, and then I gave it to everybody in the crew, and we would just over and over listen.
Yeah, but DJ Raz, like, don't give it to nobody, yo. This, that I'm gonna get killed if somebody finds out. And I'm like, all this art was, in particular for that specific circle of where I'm talking about. But I'm like, man, dude, why if politics weren't an issue and just let art flourish, man, how many things could have came out and about? That's just one small, specific, insignificant story.
Hey, I got a few of those. I have a few of those. One of them, the one that hurts me the most, is there was a song that Kenny Diaz, Sapphire's husband, had started with AB, and I don't remember if Sapphire was already on it or not, but they had asked me for a favor to mix a couple of demos, and I said, listen, I'm working on a brand new project called Don't Look Back, and I would love to include this song on it. I want to see if I could get because AB is already on it on the first verse, and the second verse needed to be written, but the chorus was there, and I said, if I can do this with Kay and Wilma, with Sapphire, and they said, okay, take the record, So I talked to Kay, and he said he was willing, and so we recorded Kay. I think Kay did the second verse. AB had the first verse. Kay did the second verse, and the chorus was together. And Wilma had a part, and it was an incredible record. And then it got complicated. It got complicated, and because it was basically them saying to me, we give you our permission, to take this and work it and put it on your album, but it was theirs, even though I did work on it now, we created new lyrics and, all that stuff, but it was basically, me just polishing up what Kenny Diaz had done. So it was a nice collaboration between everybody. It'll never see the light of day. It's buried, and nobody will probably ever hear it.
Is that because of contractual issues with artists and labels and stuff? Is that why?
No, it's just that, at a certain point, I think it becomes, just a difference of opinion and, that kind of thing.
Carlos, do you have a problem emailing that to me?
Yeah, can't do that.
Nah, man, don't compromise him, brother.
No, I'm just kidding.
Oh my goodness, man, because but Carlos, that's my point, man. That's my point exactly. Is
that's
unfortunately
sad,
relations, and I'm sure you probably don't want to say, but and I don't even know. I'm speculating as well. Relationships go sour, politics. And one person's not down for it, and it is what it is. It's sad, man. It's sad, but moving forward, brother. Listen, I consider you a master of your craft. Have you ever thought about doing more master classes to teach people, your production methods, your techniques on editing? And if so, how would someone go about enrolling in something like that? Because believe me, brother, if I get wind that listen, I'm in Cali, I will take a week off from work, to be down there in New York in my old stomping grounds to learn from a master such as yourself, man?
Well, I mean, I get asked a lot. I do, and I have considered it, but I do know how time consuming it is to put together, one of these courses.
A curriculum, yeah.
Yeah, and I definitely wouldn't mind doing it, but it's just a time issue for me. I'm swamped with work. I'm doing more film work than music. Where I mix film and color correct and edit film and even direct.
Oh,
so
man, that's dope.
Yeah, so the problem with music at this moment, anyway, is that it's very difficult, to find a way to make a living at it if you're not already one of the top dogs, and where back in the day, I used to get, whatever, $30,000 to do a track or whatever. Now people don't want to pay,
Right. Right.
And right now I'm at a point where people are willing to pay, something, and my price is a lot higher than what everybody else is charging right now. So I'm like, well, if you're willing to pay this, then I might consider putting it into the schedule. But the truth of the matter is that that my living in the film side, is like night and day. It's a real business.
It's a lot more. I'm assuming it's a lot more profitable.
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah, definitely.
How did you transition from music? How did you transition from music into film? Did you feel the decline of music, and then you decided that you needed to do something else, or when did you really stop producing like you were? I should say.
When like in the early '90s, because Together Forever was meant to be. Well, not meant to be anything, but what it did was it breathed extra life into freestyle on a commercial, level, at least for another year or two. And then after that, it was done. So around 93, 94, I really couldn't see a place for myself anymore. And it was around this time that Frank Reyes started to write screenplays. And he was actively trying to get one of them made, even though he had never directed anything in his life, But Frank Reyes, if piece of trivia, was one of the lead actors in Beat Street, so he's been around.
Wow!
He's been around for a while, and this is an interesting story. For Carlito's Way, they hired Jelly Bean to do the music supervision, and they hired his sister Debbie to choreograph the mambo scenes in the clubs, with Pacino and Sean Penn. Well, Debbie Benitez came down with something. She was very sick, and she called Frank because he was the only other choreographer, I guess, that she trusted, and asked him if he would take her place. So he went down there, he choreographed those mambo scenes with Al Pacino and Sean Penn and whoever else.
Wow.
So when they were doing in between the setups, and Frank knows, he had been on film sets before. So he was just sitting around and he grabbed the screenplay and he read it from page to page. And he said, you know what? I think I could do one of these. So he started writing. And eventually, after a lot of drama and ups and downs and promises broken and all kinds of stuff, finally, and I think it was around 2000, he did Empire with John Leguizamo, Peter Sarsgaard, Denise Richards.
Oh, that's a good movie.
Wow.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. He wrote that. He wrote and directed that. And he also wrote and directed, he wrote Lisette's first album. So watching him transition into that field, inspired all of our friends. And I actually jumped into acting school, believe it or not. And I took a 2-year Meisner course. And started to go out on auditions, and I did, I think, at least a couple of things on stage and a couple of things in indie film, some indie films that nobody's ever going to see. But eventually I realized that I didn't like being in front of the camera. I liked the idea of being in front of the camera, but I didn't like working in front of the camera because I wasn't in control. You know what I mean? Mm. So at the same time that Frank was off doing his film and doing his thing, I had a buddy. We became friends. He was actually my martial arts instructor, and we would talk a lot about art. He was really interested in everything from music and filmmaking. So I told him what my friend Frank was doing. So he went and got himself one of the first DV cameras and one of the first Macs after Steve Jobs came back. And he sat and started to, figure out how to record and edit on DV, And I said, yo, I'm going to be a camera person. I'm going to be the camera guy. So we went out and we started shooting little skits and little things like that. And then I borrowed 2 lights from my uncle who was doing photography, and we started learning how to light. And then we bought a boom and we started learning how to do sound. And before you know it, we were doing short films. And it was one of these short films that somebody saw, and they hired me for my first gig to edit a PSA. And then it was that PSA that people saw because it was very emotional. And then I was hired to do a music video, and then another music video, and then another music video. And then I did my first proper short film called The Found in 2009. And it just went on and on like that. Frank, of course, went on to do Illegal Tender with John Singleton, and another film that he filmed, but it never came out because the company went bankrupt. But I think it's about to be distributed, called The Ministers, with John Leguizamo playing twin brothers. So yeah, it's just you got to put in the grind, man. You got to put in the work.
You got to find a way to eat, man. Yeah, when something's not feeding you, you got to move on to something else. Yeah. And I can see that you taking it serious. You're taking it like you did your music. Yeah, he's
evolving.
It's incredible. It's incredible.
I got to tell you, man. Reach out to my homeboy here, DJ Don Q, because he does some acting on the side too, man. So you guys connect.
Oh man. So I don't know if you know, man. Carlos. I don't know if you know about Central Casting, but I belong to those guys, and I've been doing background acting. I know, you said you don't like to be in front of the camera, but I was able to get on Mrs. Maisel, Secession. I was just in a Lay's commercial, and I just did Mr. Robot. The other night we did a Hallmark Christmas movie in a very expensive hotel in New York City. So I'm finding, now I'm a DJ also, but I'm finding different avenues to make money, and I'm really enjoying this acting thing.
It's definitely fun, and it's a whole other thing. I know people who make a really good living, just doing background. But of course, listen, I came up at a time where I saw the first generation. I shouldn't say the first generation, but in this discussion, not to alienate any of our non-Latino brothers and sisters, but our struggle has always been, to find a way to be represented in media that's not stereotypical,
right.
Big time.
And one of the first battles I think that Frank came upon was when he did Empire. He got no real support from the Latino community because they were kind of upset, that he made Leguizamo a drug dealer, and that sort of thing, with a gun in his hand, Mm-hmm. But we always, especially Frank, he always argued, that idea is in itself hypocritical, because you can't hold us to a different standard than you would do any other, superstar that you admire, the best characters in the film are the anti-heroes, so mm-hmm. you're not, would you have gone, would you have preferred to see Al Pacino, play a psychiatrist that helps out so-and-so, whatever, or him holding that machine gun and saying, say hello to my little friend.
Say hello to my little friend, of course, man.
Perhaps furthermore, I would say this is a role for, and like you said, we're not trying to, push any other races aside, but any role going to a Latin actor is a good thing. So, when you get a sandwich, whether it's bologna or cheese, don't complain that it's, it's not the sandwich that you want. Be grateful that you received a piece of meat or a meal that you can eat. Be grateful and count your blessings is what I would say.
Big time.
The idea is to reach for the stars. I heard in some documentary, I think Al Pacino said, reach for the stars, or what's a heaven for, and it's sort of like my approach to, just about anything. They say I'm a perfectionist. Yeah. and before I work with people, that I have to rely on work, like I want them to give 110% of themselves.
Absolutely.
I have to explain to them, they're like, I'm not going for 100%, bro, because you're lucky if you get to 60 or 70. So we have to go for 150
above,
and then we'll be lucky if we'll land on 80 or 85,
Yes.
So that's kind of like the idea, so the idea is to do the best work possible. And we went to, we went to California, went to Los Angeles in 1996. Frank had done a trailer for one of his scripts called In the Deep South, and it had Lauren Velez, from New York Undercover and Dexter and all those type of shows, and Yancey Arias, who was an up and coming dude, and John Seda, who was in Selena, and even me, like I'm walking in it. I don't have no lines. I'm walking, but but he shot this thing. We were all amped up, and we're like, "Oh, go in." There's this organization called Latin Heat, run by Bel Hernandez, and so we went to the conference. And when we were there, it was there that we realized that where we thought there might possibly be a real, Latino movement in film, there wasn't. It was just people sort of wanting to get in, but not being aggressive about it. Yeah. And so, there's a really interesting story. So we're on a panel, and Gregory Nava is up there, very, legendary, Latino filmmaker, and some representative from Miramax and some other people, and they were basically telling us in the audience, what you have to do is empower yourselves, and you have to, go out and pull your communities together and support each other and do what Magic Johnson is doing, build theaters, that kind of thing. And this just riled Frank up, So there was a Q&A period, and when it was his turn, he went up on the mic and he just started like letting them have it, like cursing at them. He said, I'm really disappointed in what I'm hearing from you, but I'm doubly disappointed at this audience who's clapping at your bullshit.
Right.
because what you're doing is you're passing the buck. What you're really saying is we don't have a solution. Therefore,
go get it yourself.
You guys created.
Right.
Yep.
Right. So that was sort of like the catalyst for the New York, at least the New York, because listen, the West Coast has been doing its thing, and we here on the East Coast are tremendous fans of the Mexican American expression, the Chicano expression, and we're big fans of movies like American Me, Blood In, Blood Out.
Oh yeah, big time.
That kind of stuff.
Danny Trujillo. Oh, yep.
Yeah. But we're struggling over here, to make that expression. So now when Frank gets to the point where he gets a film done with Leguizamo, Denise Richards, and Peter Sarsgaard, distributed by Universal Films, and doesn't get the support that he should have gotten, it really says a lot about our people.
Very disappointing.
Sad. Yep. Extremely sad. Yeah.
So
and you could take that to music. You look at music. Let's go look at freestyle. Most of these guys in these radio stations and everything were Latinos, were supporting freestyle, and they let it go. They let it fly. They let it say no. Let people call that bubblegum. That's not gonna fly. Our own people were not playing. Latino DJs stopped playing freestyle on regular airways, even in their mix shows. It became house music. Like us, we did it to ourselves.
Go ahead, Carlos.
I do agree, that we did it to ourselves. But, when those platforms, they're just platforms for distribution, and you have to give them something to play. You know what I'm saying? That's like, to me, where freestyle was at the time. And it's not to say, because listen, I cared. I wanted to make good records, I don't know about everybody else. Did they really want to make good records? I don't know. Were they trying to make good records? I don't know. They say that, or Frank says, it takes just as much effort and work and sweat and time and all of that to make a bad film as it does making a good film. So why don't you just make a good film? You know what I'm saying?
True.
So the same thing applies to music. I never understood, why there was so much, so many inferior records, inferior vocals, inferior mixes, inferior, So the truth of the matter is that there wasn't enough of a supply of good records for the radio stations to justify continuing to play freestyle. I understood it even back then,
Yeah.
And
you're right.
And to be honest with you, it's the reason why Together Forever popped, because it was something else.
Something fresh.
Listen,
innovating.
Listen, the first records, right? There's a debate here in New York about what was the first freestyle record. And it sort of whittles down to, it's either Naobi's Please Don't Go or Shannon, Let the Music Play, right?
Yeah.
Now, if you remember that era, right? You had all these records that were coming out that we consider freestyle today, but they all had a different style,
sound,
taste to them.
All in all, by Mantronics, Hanson and Davis, Hungry for Your Love,
yeah.
Show Me, Second Chance for Love, all these records. But then somehow, over a period of time, everything got whittled down to this one little cheesy, freestyle sound, basically. So I can't sit back and blame, the radio stations for not wanting to play it. I don't.
You're right, Carlos. And I'll tell you why it got whittled down to a cookie cutter type of music format is because at the time it was popular and it was like the California Gold Rush. Everyone wanted in and everyone wanted to get a payday. And unfortunately, the talent, vocalists weren't up to par, perhaps even the production. And people, to a certain extent, I remember maybe back in 1993, 1994, I think the last piece of vinyl that I bought was from Charlie, You Take Me Higher. And then after that, I stopped purchasing vinyl because I was like, in my personal opinion, freestyle was in the trash. I hate to say it, but I saw it coming in 1992 with George Lamond in my life. And, that was the last video that was played on MTV was Where Does That Leave Love? After that, freestyle was dead. And I hate to say it, but, in my personal opinion, you're right. Cookie cutter sounds, vocalist with, in my personal opinion, very not talented and it crashed the genre.
Overflooded the genre with all these different artists coming out, all these different people. There was no
Rats came out and everyone wanted a payday.
Yeah, big time.
So here's the problem. And it's something that we talk about a lot. Because we want to understand, or at the very least, see why is this the case? If we If when Captain Crunch does a cereal commercial and they want to gear it towards Latino, why is it that they use maracas and festiva fonts and that sort of thing, and that idea, which is extremely offensive and stereotypical, I think that there's a lack of true like an idea of who we are, as a people in America, an American Latino thing, saying, because when you think about the hip hop movement, even though it's predominantly, or it was, you think of hip hop and you think rap and you think, African American, you don't think anything other than American, African American, you know what I mean? And when it comes to Latinos, for a second, we had an opportunity, with freestyle, to have that sort of lead the way and be our American Latino expression.
Right.
But nobody really, but we didn't, the majority of the people didn't take it seriously.
Yeah,
we didn't capitalize on it. We didn't capitalize on our opportunity.
You're right. Our freestyle was, and because believe me, I'm a rapper too. I like to rap too, so they were both in the same lane. It just happens that hip hop was able to evolve and open different chambers where freestyle stagnated and the rocket booster just fell apart and it died in orbit. That makes sense, right?
Well, we had a good run, we did have a good run, but look, just like I'll tell you this story, and a lot of times, maybe it was always going to be out of our control, because when you're dealing with with entities that don't truly understand us culturally, or just as people, even as Americans, there's going to be a set mindset as to like what we're about and what we can offer, And when you're dealing with companies, right, whether it's record companies or film companies, all they care about is green. That's the only color they care about, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you have to step up. You have to step up if you have the opportunity to show, that what you have is commercially viable and that it's in their interest as a business, to be involved in what you're doing. We didn't really do that, But on the other side, because I experienced this too, that sort of lack of respect manifests itself in other ways too. A lot of, if not all, the freestyle artists, whoever did any radio shows or shows for radio stations around the country, particularly in New York, were taken advantage of. Because it's always that carrot. It's like, we'll fly out to Chicago or fly out to Miami, and we'll think about playing your record on rotation. So now you got to gather up the troops. You got to spend that money, but buy the plane tickets because they're not going to do it for you. They know they kind of have you against the wall. Right. And in New York, it became an abuse, like a real abuse from the radio stations here in New York. And but there was no way to fight it.
You had to go through the motions of trying to get your stuff going.
And I go as far as to say this, and I know we're getting long-winded, and Carlos, we're not going to keep you on the MIC for too much longer, but I got to say this. Ourselves ate our own artist and destroyed our own dreams and some of us, our own record companies by taking advantage of the artist, not giving them proper contracts and, leaving them out to the wind and just utilizing it as a factory to make money and really shitting on the artist. And, once the artist finds out, they're going to jump ship. And then surely the company is going to fall apart because all your artists have come to find out that you don't do business in the proper professional manner. And your record company goes under. I'm not going to state any names, but that's happened before in the past.
We all know who we're talking about.
Yeah.
But listen, this is the other side of the coin that I also wanted to talk about. And I think Andy Panda might have touched on it a little bit in that really unimpressive documentary that came out recently. Mm-hmm. But the truth of the matter is that, let's say, for instance, Together Forever, because, just going back to originally, Frankie came, it was supposed to be Frankie's song. Frank Reyes wrote it for Frankie. And Frankie changed his mind at the last minute, and he suggested that we give it to Lisette, because she was basically in the room, and she was my only artist at the time. So we demoed it up. But from that moment forward, for a year and a half, I took that record around, and nobody wanted it. Like nobody wanted it, even my friends, And I always welcome, truth. Like, I want you to tell me the truth, why you don't like it, whatever, does it suck? Does beat suck? Does she suck? Whatever. And everyone, just basically said, it doesn't work. It's a weird record. I'm like, okay, by the time we got it out, it wasn't a secret, that even though we were through Def Jam and Sony, it was through Fever, Def Jam, and Sony, that the Sony arm, Def Jam didn't understand it, obviously. And Sony, saw it as a nothing record, and they had no interest whatsoever in promoting it. So it was Andy who called me and said, "Listen, this is what's going on. We're going to have to pool our money together if you're down, and we're going to have to hire independent promoters because they're not going to do it. They're going to let the record die." So I said, "Yeah, let's do it." So it was that push that got it into the top 40. Otherwise, it would probably never seen the pop charts. Only because, every record should have the same opportunity as, that record should have had the same opportunity as any other record that they believed in.
Agreed.
But that's how easy it is to fall by the wayside.
Agreed.
And if it wasn't that, that Andy formulated a plan, or Fever formulated a plan, that would have never happened. The record would have never been a hit. It would have never, I don't know.
I don't know. A lot of day, maybe.
I don't know, because from the moment that it played on the radio, they got a tremendous response from the audience. You know what I mean? So maybe it might have still did something, but I don't think it would have. I don't think it would have entered the top 40. Now, when it came time to do music videos, you know, they didn't give us the type of budget that they were giving other artists. I think it was like maybe half of a budget. You know, so the music video was shot on 16 millimeter. Rosie Perez was hired to do the choreography, and everything was shot in one day. Now, that music video, when it was done for a top 40 record, was taken to MTV, and they basically said, yeah, we know it's a top 40 record, but we don't play Latins. We don't play Latins, so we're not playing this.
Oh, man.
Okay? So there's the other glass
obstacle.
You know what I mean? Yeah. So if we were primed, you know, to sort of move a different level, you know, with Lisette being on Sony, you know, George Lamond being on Columbia, Sweet Sensation on Atlantic, and Sapphire on Polygram, and you know, we were on major labels.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
And we had an opportunity, but they didn't really open the door. You know, they didn't let us in. You know, they cracked the door open and we could see through and we could see the big party going on inside, but they didn't welcome us in. You know what I'm saying? So, you know, that idea, that concept, it still permeates today. I don't know if you guys are aware, but on Twitter, there's a whole Twitter storm thing going on because somebody wrote an article about, you know, the lack of representation in media, particularly in Hollywood films, you know, of Latino characters. You know what I mean? And for us, this is nothing new. This has been going back all the way back, and even before, you know, 96 when we took that trip out to California.
Right.
You know? It continues to be a struggle, and you know, and now, you know, thank God, you know, we have a generation of young people who are woke, you know, and who are openly, you know, willing to be activists. So I'm hoping that with this generation, you know, something changes, because, you know, it's been like this since the beginning, you know, from my youth and probably from before. I literally watched talented people, singers, actors, directors, cinematographers. I've literally watched these people grow old, waiting for an opportunity. People with talent, you know what I mean?
Yep.
So that's the way I feel about it.
I feel your cries, Carlos. Well, listen, as long as myself and DJ Don Q and our crew is still alive, and believe me, back in the days, we were young kids, so we really didn't have a platform or any financial means to do any type of push. But believe me, that's why we're doing what we're doing. And you know, the podcast just isn't for freestyle artists, but, you know, it's to touch individuals that we feel that helped us or touched us when we were growing up, and we're just trying to show that love back, man, because there's nothing more beautiful than for you to hear your favorite artist when you're going through some bad times and they could lift you up. How can you repay that to somebody? So, you know, to me, it was a gift given to me, and we have to pay it back, if that makes sense, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And listen, real quick, I gotta say my man's name, Sammy Zone. Big shout out to Sammy Zone for making this connect happen, man. Running Redux, I love it, man. I love it. You hit that song out the ballpark, my brother.
Listen, we worked hard on that record. That record has work in it that's not even possible, you know, with what the technology that exists today. You know, I went out of my way to make sure that there was as much of an analog feel to it as possible, you know, including you know, editing it on tape. It's something that, I mean, nobody's doing it. Nobody's.
Big shout out to Sammy Zone. Real quick, brother, just right before we let you go, can you give us 2 pieces of advice that you can give anyone wanting to become a producer or an editor, someone that wants to emulate who you have become and the masterful art that you've put out, and wants to branch out and do his own things? What 2 pieces of advice would you give them as they're coming up?
The wonderful thing about modern, you know, social media and what, you know, what's available out there today, starting with YouTube, you know, there was a time, and again, I know I bring his name up a lot, but there was a lot of influence from Frank Reyes. This is a dude who, when he wanted to sort of come up with when he needed to come up with some choreography, would go to the Museum of Broadcasting and pull up tapes from the 50s and 60s and see what they were doing then. That idea. Now you can do it on YouTube. You can research. You can learn anything. I mean, anything. You can learn how to build a ship. You can learn how to build a deck. You can learn how to, take machines apart, put them back together again. So there's really no excuse for people not to do their research. If you ever watch, any artist, any superstar will tell you the most important thing is know the history of the craft that you wish to be involved in. That's paramount. You know what I mean?
Yes, sir.
Mike Tyson talks about it. He talks about how Cus D'Amato sat him down and made him watch films. So no matter what you can say about Mike Tyson, he can tell you the boxer, the year, the round, the technique. He could give you encyclopedic information. Scorsese, the same thing about film. That's where you need to be. If you want to be a writer, research the best writers in history. If you want to be a producer, research the best producers. Now they have all these courses. You have masterclass.com where you can join up. I think for the first year, I think it's only $99, and you can learn about photography. I mean, from the superstars of their craft. Scorsese teaches a class on filmmaking. So does Ron Howard. Annie Leibovitz, the photographer, teaches a master class. Dustin Hoffman teaches a master class on acting, as do other actors. I mean, it's all there. If you really want to do it, put in the work, man. Put in the work and do your research.
The funny thing is, Carlos, is because I'm a subscriber to your channel, and I was sitting there with a beer in my hand, and my wife was next to me, and I'm watching the video where you're changing out the heads on your reel-to-reel. You were changing out the components on and I'm sitting there and I'm drinking my beer, and I'm like awestruck. I've that piece of equipment I've never put in my hands, but I want to learn it. So I'm just like fascinated by it. And my wife is like, "What are you doing? What is that?" And I'm telling my wife, shh. And you're not even, I mean, you're saying very small comments, but I don't want to miss a thing. And I'm telling my wife, shh. She goes, what are you watching? And I'm like, oh my goodness, go cook something. Leave me alone, please. This is so awesome, But listen, Carlos, as a human being, man, you have been so influential in my life. And DJ Don Q, before we let this legend go, do you have anything else?
Listen to me. I don't know if people understand the importance of this man.
Impact.
Between impact and importance. I mean, us as DJs, I know, Carlos, you probably hear this all the time, but I don't think you understand it. That you are probably one of the most influential people in this music business that we all know and love. That you need to be worshipped, bro. The ground that you walk on, bro. You really need to know this, man, because when you talk about your first records and your last records, like you said, you single-handedly kept Freestyle alive with Together Forever, and then that beat carried on, different hit songs. So you need to understand that. First of all, it's a pleasure to hear you. I always wanted to talk to you in my life, so I consider this sort of a bucket list thing, for me. And I want to thank you. And
thank you, brother.
Your insight on film. For me, I want to do acting. I really do. I'm telling everyone right now that I'm so intrigued by this acting that I think I could do it. And people are laughing at me. You're a Spanish dude. You look like a Puerto Rican hick, bro. You're not going to get into any movies. And the last scene that I did, she's going to remain nameless, but the producer saw me in another film, Miss Maisel. So the same producer was a Boricua. She was a female. She saw me and I said hello to her. I said, "Oh, I remember you from Maisel." She goes, "Oh yeah, cool." She goes, so because of the relationship I created her with one scene, the next movie I did with her, she goes, "Donnie, come here. You're gonna be a waiter." I said, "Okay, cool." I was supposed to be a person sitting down in the background, but now I'm in the scene.
Yes, she remembered
I want you to be
dog.
a waiter.
She remembered
I want you to
you.
be a waiter. She said it, and she remembered me. And this is how you start creating relationships.
Right.
But I think because she was Latina, I was Latino, and I spoke to her. I think she was my saving grace, bro. Because she's like, "I want to get Latinos in this film."
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So then she took me. She goes, "Nah, you know what? I'm gonna make you a security guard." And I got so much FaceTime in the last thing I did that I'm like, you know what? The next time I work with her, I could have another opportunity. So I think that what you said, yes, we have to work extra hard doing what we do as Latinos. I'm sorry, it's truth. Yeah. It is truth. As you said, the door was open. We were able to peek in, but we couldn't break through. But I'm getting older, but I'm still determined to break through, bro. In anything I do, I'm sorry. I love the challenge. You can't. The minute you tell me I can't do something, I'm going to work extra hard on it. I'm sorry. That's just the way it is for me, man. So I appreciate you, your influence, your insight. I would love to speak with you for another 8 hours, but I know the architects are not going to let that happen. But for real, thank you so much for your contribution to our life, man. Really, thank you. I can't thank you enough, man. Really.
Well, thank you guys for this, man. It's fun. I'm usually a very quiet guy. You guys pulled out the conversationist in me.
Oh, that's awesome, bro. That's good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And
we got to do it over some beers, man, next time. Man.
Absolutely. Hey, look, and Carlos, if you wouldn't mind me saying so, if you haven't thought about, doing an autobiography, maybe possibly doing a book about your life, I think it'd be very interesting. And then having your voice yourself, because you have a very interesting, calming voice, very soothing voice. I think it'd be very interesting to hear an audio book of your life and you reading it out. And if you need any help with that on a financial standpoint, you reach out to me, brother.
I'm down too. I will definitely contribute.
But I'm going to tell you something. There's a particular spectrum of people that need to hear your story. And I would love to help you out in that venue in any way I could.
No, I appreciate that. Yeah,
or you know what? Can we surgically transplant his calmness into my wife's voice? Because I think that would be a big help in my house.
Hey, so when she's telling you to clean up the bathroom and beating you with the chancleta is not as rough?
It wouldn't be as rough if it was coming from the calmingness of Carlos.
Yeah,
you know what I'm
man. Hey, listen, Carlos, thank you so much, man. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much, man.
I appreciate it, man. Thank you.
Absolutely. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, this has been Chapter 58 with the great Carlos Berrios. Thank you so much. I love you guys. Please be safe this weekend. Once again, this is your homeboy, DJ Architect. Love you guys. We're out.
DJ Architect.